Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brandy Vincent and I report on emerging technology at NextGov. And I'm really excited to be joined here with Jose Arrieta. He is the Chief Information Officer at Health and Human Services, where he has really been leveraging emerging technologies like blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence to launch this agency into a new era of modernization. Just a note, he has agreed to take questions from the audience, so we want you to start thinking about those now, but we'll go ahead and dive in.
Sure.
So, to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about the responsibilities you have in your role now and how emerging technology is really falling all into that?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me this morning. It's good to see everyone. I see some familiar faces. I think that when I look at the responsibilities that I have now, I'm really focused in 4 areas. First and foremost, and this is part of it, is direct engagement with our industry partners. The 3 that are related to operations is smart cloud. So I don't just want to talk about how, I don't want to just say we're moving to cloud. I want to talk about we're going to move to cloud in 3 or 4 different ways, and what are the costs associated with that. Rationalization of applications, moving to cloud from a managed service perspective, moving data to a commercial cloud environment and building customized microservices. Those are 3 different ways, 3 different investment strategies with 3 different ROIs, and there may be some other approaches. So I want to get into more of the details of how we move to cloud. I think the second area is once you're in a commercial cloud environment, we want to test emerging technology. It's just like anything. We want to actually create a ripple effect within our organization, test emerging technology, leveraging human-centered design. What that allows us to do is actually turn on the workforce, directly engage them in using emerging technology and give them that experience. So we actually have 3 emerging test technology pilots right now. I've been the CIO for about 70 days, but I was at HHS for a little while. So we're testing behavioral-based analytics at the edge of the network. We have actually built a long short-term memory recurrent neural network that's functioning at this moment in time, and I've actually said it publicly like only a few days ago, but this is the first time I think in a setting like this. And then many of you have heard about our use of Hyperledger and blockchain technology, coupled with human-centered design to kind of reimagine the acquisition lifecycle. And I think the third area of focus is cybersecurity. And from a basics perspective, we just want to improve cyber hygiene. From a more long-term perspective, we want to start using some of these emerging technologies to actually create more visibility into activity that's occurring as it relates to our network. So those are and then obviously communication with the industrial base. So those are kind of my focus areas and the things that I'm focused on in the first 70 days. Now, I'm sure some of them will change as different threats arise and different issues arise, but I think that if you're thinking about modernizing an agency, the legal framework actually exists to modernize an agency. FITARA empowers the CIO. FedRAMP says secure commercial cloud environments are a good thing. MGT Act provides incentives for modernization within federal agencies. So strategically, our approach is not to look at one of the laws. It's to look holistically at all of the laws and actually use them as tools to actually modernize the way we do business. So we look at it as a legal framework that's encouraging and allowing us to modernize with a strong incentive structure.
That's incredible. I wasn't joking when I said he was launching the agency into modernization. You've only been there for 70 days. Now for the fun stuff. Part of the reason that we invited you here is to speak a little bit about HHSAccelerate. It's the government's first blockchain-powered authority to operate, and I think the first for public procurement in the world. So I'd love to hear about how it came to be and how it all works.
Yeah, so when I joined HHS, we do about $24.2 billion in contracting a year, about 100,000 contracts. The contracting activity at HHS is executed through over 50 systems, 5 of which have the largest amount of data. There are 5 contract writing systems that have a significant amount of data on the 100,000 contracts. So for years, HHS had been trying to move the agency to one contract writing capability. And they had little success, because when you think about it, you're trying to change a workforce of 20,000 people and say, look, you're all going to do business in this way. We're going to train you on how to use one system. Some of them had created homegrown systems. Some of them were using different commercial off-the-shelf technology. So they had a difficult time kind of shifting the agency. So what we did is said, why don't we focus on the data first? And so we came to the idea of using blockchain and actually moving the data on 100,000 contracts, and using blockchain as an attestation layer. Everybody likes to talk about blockchain. We just see it as a part of the tech stack. We're using it as an attestation layer. And what do I mean by that? When you go into a bar, and you're younger, I guess they don't ID me anymore, especially since I became CIO. I'm much grayer in the first 70 days than I was. When you go into a bar, they check your ID. What does your ID have? It has first name, last name, date of birth, and address. What if you could just attest to the fact that you were 21 and that all those data elements existed, but you weren't actually sharing them in real time? You just had an attestation layer. So we're using blockchain like that. We're attesting to the fact that we have indexed data on contract files. We're storing that information off-chain in a database that has a corresponding hash to an on-chain hash, and then we have a transactional database on-chain that is a record of any time somebody accesses that data, we're vetting access to data. We're not just giving it to everybody. So our idea was move 100,000 contracts, $24.2 billion in spend annually. We have that data for 10 years. Move that all to blockchain as an attestation layer, store it in an off-chain database, and then build microservices using the workforce to automate business process. We've engaged our workforce. I think we've engaged over 3,000 members of the workforce in human-centered design sessions and built containerized microservices off of that attestation layer that executes actions of the acquisition lifecycle. Those actions are focused on lessening the burden on industry partners, focused on enabling program managers with the information they need to do their job, focused on providing insight on prices paid and terms and conditions at the point of purchase. So what does that mean? If you do business via HHSAccelerate and you're an industry partner, no more rewriting SAM.gov information. We're going to auto do reps and certs, validation and verification, auto do financial responsibility determination, have an immutable record of all your interactions with the agency that's only available to you and to your identity on the blockchain itself. What does it mean for a program manager? If you're a cancer researcher at HHS and you're doing cancer research, we ask a series of questions kind of like TurboTax, and what we do is pull up historical statement of work information. We have 98,000 statements of work in HHSAccelerate. On the basis of those keyword tags, using a recurrent neural network, we pull that information up so that you can visually see it. And as you answer those questions, we pre-populate a market research report about what's been done before or maybe what exists in the vendor portal. And we allow you to read that and focus in on your goals, objectives, timeline, risk, stakeholder engagement strategy. That allows you to be creative, allows you to be the problem solver, it allows you to see what's been done before. It also gives you the ability to see what information exists in our vendor portal. And then lastly, if you're an industry partner, if you're a contracting professional, we wanted to have an experience much like you have in Target. I never knew this existed. My wife actually gave me this example, so thank her. But if you're in Target and you look up a price on Amazon or Best Buy, I teach at Hopkins University, and one of the students tried this at Best Buy. If you look up the price on Amazon and show it to the cashier and it's cheaper, they'll immediately give you a discount at the point of purchase. That's empowering. So we created that ability for the contracting professional. We actually created that capability from April 17th of 2018 as a proof by September 30th, right? And then we've just been adding functionality and capability to it ever since. So that's kind of the approach that we took. That's the problem we were trying to solve, and that's kind of the landscape. And from a data perspective, the area we focused in on. And if you're wondering, it's about 10 terabytes of data. Contracting data if you go back 10 years. So it's 1.7 million contracts, about 100,000 statements of work. Is it perfect? No. Is it a starting point? Yes.
Absolutely. And can you speak a little bit deeper into these sort of microservices being built on top, especially the neural network? How is that really revolutionary?
Yeah, so we think that we build a long short-term memory recurrent neural network, and we think, I have not heard, I'm sure there's some other folks in the federal space that are doing it. So let me give you an example of what a neural network is. So, if you think about rise over run, right? If you're walking down a hill and it's linear in nature and every step is 6 inches, you pretty much know where you're going to be and how much time it's going to take you to get there, right? Every step is 6 inches, hill is linear, you know exactly how far you're traveling with each step. But if you're out in the woods and you start to walk down a hill, it's not like that. One step is 6 inches, one step is 3 inches, one step is 5 inches, one step is an inch. And let's say you come to a cliff. you have to make a decision. Do you sit on your bottom and slide down? Do you jump? Right? Well, how does a computer system actually understand that? How does a computer system actually compute that, right? So you have to be able to, you have to have the ability to forget what has occurred before and get to a point where you have to make a decision. So we kind of wanted to create the same thing. And so what we did, and I'll explain to you a little more tactically about how it works, but we started and said, well, what is a problem we would like to solve? Well, let's take the question of inherently governmental, okay? Let's take the question of inherently governmental, and what if we could read statements of work, and what if we could analyze them and compare it to personnel descriptions and determine if work is inherently governmental or not, right? It's a simple problem. We can get PD data. We have all these statements of work that exist. We have all these documented labor categories. Why don't we try that? So what we actually did is we used our long short-term memory recurrent neural network to do that analysis. And it comes up with a confidence score as to how accurate the prediction is. And what we're actually doing is we're using natural language processing to read through statements of work. And we're categorizing that statement of work or weighting certain attributes of information that we find in it. We're then assigning it a number, what we call a vector. We're assigning it a number or a vector, and then we're pushing that into a predictive model, because the predictive model can't analyze text, but it can analyze a number. And the predictive model says with 80% accuracy, we believe that, this work is inherently governmental or it isn't inherently governmental. That's extremely powerful because we've been able to directly identify savings related to doing work in-house versus contracting it out. Is that really game-changing? I don't know, but the implications for where you go next with that is what's really game-changing to us. And we were able to do that off of HHSAccelerate because we had all the data, we have all the data indexed. We were able to do that in 3 weeks.
It's incredible.
At a very low cost.
That's incredible, and it sounds like it really could change the way the government does business. But how is this sort of work scalable to other agencies? And what advice do you have for people in government who are looking to sort of do things like this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that the way that we think about HHSAccelerate is that from an infrastructure perspective, we have a core node and a business service layer. So anybody that wants to partner with us, if you're an agency that wants to partner with us, we're basically saying, look, core node and business service layer is exactly the same. So what does that mean? We're going to index this data the same? Well, we index data different. No, you don't. You index data in accordance with federal law. And our indexing system is directly aligned with GSA's category management schema and something called the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So if you're not indexed and associated with that in that way, then you're probably not doing business in a legal manner, right? So we're going to index it on the basis of federal law and GSA category management schema. And I want to pause and talk about that for a second. If you think about the alphabet, A through Z, right? Let's say that HHS uses A, B, and C as a part of the indexing system, and GSA uses X, Y, and Z. The indexing is still the same. It's just the data attributes that you're actually using that are different, right? So when I say we indexed it in accordance with federal law, we created a location for every single attribute from a data perspective to exist. That's the core node. Then we created a core business service layer. This is how we're going to read, write. This is how we're going to share information. It's your basic API layer. So if an agency wants to partner with us, what we'll say is like, look, we want to share data. We understand that there's some data that you can't share, but we want to share data. We want to operate on the basis of this indexing system that we've created that aligns with federal law. But from our perspective, if you want to go and build your own microservices, go ahead, go do it, and you manage your O&M costs. If you want to use our microservices, go ahead and use our microservices. You can customize them if you want. You carry and manage your O&M costs. And if you just want to access the data and use your own COT technology, absolutely go and do it, and you manage your own O&M cost at the application layer. So that is our approach for kind of partnering with other agencies. We get this question a lot, and I just almost stopped answering it. Well, why blockchain? I could have done that with a normal database. And my answer is, for all the people that think that, why haven't you done it? The Federal Acquisition System's been around since 1949. Why haven't you done it? A lot of people have tried. Why haven't you done it? Simple as that. Until you do it, it can't be done.
Would best case scenario for you be seeing a bunch of agencies kind of implement this sort of tech?
I think the best case scenario for us is to be able to drive down costs and create visibility into data sets across HHS. I think that the opportunity to partner and share data with other agencies is an awesome opportunity. Of course, that would be wonderful, but I try not to focus on 3 years. I try to focus on, this year. Like my son said to me the other day, he said, "Dad, I think there's something wrong with my brain." He's 7 years old. And I was like, geez, I'm thinking like he has a headache, maybe he hit his head. He says, "I think," and I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "My teacher keeps telling me I got to focus on my math work, but I have all these ideas popping into my head and I can't focus on anything." And I'm like, okay, so what do we focus on for the next 3 nights? We're going to focus on math homework. So I try to focus on kind of what's right in front of me.
That's awesome.
If he ends up being a physicist, that'll be great in 3 years. But if I can get him through 2nd grade and not thinking there's something wrong with his brain, that's just as good too, and that's where I'm going to focus my energy.
That's awesome. I recently spoke to Oki Mech on your team about some other work that you were doing with the CDM program and blockchain, and one of the things he said to me, and I quote, "Top-down support from leadership is very critical. Without strong leadership, we cannot do this. Without Jose, we cannot do this." I want you to talk to us about your leadership approach, because you've clearly gotten buy-in from some of the workforce, and tell us what's really worked and maybe what really hasn't worked so well over the course of your career.
Yeah. I think that the first time I brought up using blockchain, not at HHS, but at another agency, I remember it was a room like this. It was federal employees, and there was a person sitting right there. And he was rolling his eyes, literally rolling his eyes, that'll never work, this guy's an idiot, right? And we came back in a month and we showed him a proof, and I brought him up. If you can find old videos where I actually use his name, I'm not going to do it today, since there's media here. But I kept bringing him up, and I said, "I remember XYZ person in the front row rolling their eyes." So I think from a leadership perspective, I'm not afraid to fail. And I'm not afraid if it doesn't work. I think the impact of actually trying something, the impact of those 3,000 human-centered, the impact of touching base with 3,000 people from a human-centered design perspective, that's more impactful than any technology that you'll actually implement, because it turns on and creates activity in your workforce. I was a college basketball player, and obviously I played in high school as well. You miss a ton of shots and you make a ton of shots. So I think from a leadership perspective, my dad ran a small company. Sometimes you make investment decisions and they work out. Sometimes you make investment decisions and they don't work. I'm not afraid to fail, and you have to own it. And you have to be transparent about what you're doing so that nobody can say they didn't know. So I think that's my approach. What has not worked? I think there's been a number of things that have not worked throughout the process. I think the thing that has worked most is controlling risk and being able to pivot very quickly. So we didn't go and try to rebuild the entire acquisition life cycle on Accelerate. We focused on, first building a proof. First we did wireframing of the business process, and we came up with recommendations. Let's say that cost a couple $100,000. Then we said, okay, we're going to make an investment. We're going to make an investment of less than $1 million. We're going to do it over a period of 2 months, and I want to create the core infrastructure that we think can get ATO'd, some value for our industry partners, and some value for program managers. And we're literally going to the CIO. I wasn't the CIO at the time. We're literally going to the CIO, the CISO. We're going to leadership, and we're briefing them kind of in a circular format. So was that the smartest move? I don't know, but it allowed us to go really fast. It allowed us to get feedback in real time. And we broke it up into small chunks, and it covered our risk. So I think that's the biggest lesson learned, is don't hide under the covers and just think you're going to unveil everything at one moment in time. Take all of the critical feedback that you're going to get along the way, and deal with it. How many people have told me that I could have done this with a standard database? Someone in the audience right now is probably going to thinking I was going to ask that question. Do you know how many times I've heard that question? Hundreds, right? But lesson learned, we didn't stop. And then I got to the point where I was like, I'm not even going to answer why blockchain works here. I'm just going to ask the question back. Why hasn't some of the largest companies in the world tackled that problem? Because the federal acquisition system has been around since 1949.
So here we are talking a lot about blockchain, but I know you guys have other exciting emerging technology under your belt, and some of which you haven't spoken much about yet. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this pilot you guys have going on with DISA around behavioral identity, and sort of how that could take the place of username and password authentication.
So I always call him Major Nick, but then I finally realized what his last name is. It's Major Nick Ziegler and Sherry Sokol. So they reached out to me and they said, Jose, we're really interested in what you're doing with blockchain, and because we have this idea around identity. And I have to be honest with you, when we first met with them, it really took me like 15 minutes to actually understand what he was even talking about. Because he's a brilliant guy. You should have him at Next. So essentially what DIS has done is they've created behavioral-based identity to create identity at the edge of a network. And they've proofed it and it works, right? So what does that mean? It means that I can go, my wife's from La Paz, Bolivia, so I can go into Jose Arrieta's Radio Shack in La Paz, Bolivia. I can buy a Samsung S10 Galaxy phone with a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip in it. And I can actually create my identity on the edge of the network on that device using 240 different behavioral characteristics. And so what do I mean by that? When you wake up in the morning, you're connected to a secure Wi-Fi. I'm going to do a facial scan just like we all unlock our iPhones now. I'm going to do an iris read. I have thumbprint tagging capability. When I walk downstairs, I immediately connect to my Whirlpool dryer. I don't know why our Whirlpool driver has Wi-Fi connectivity. My wife wanted it. I have no idea why, but it does, and it's an attribute related to you as a person, right? I'm doing humidity and temperature reads outside. I'm taking a record and recording the behavior of how you use the phone. What apps do you access? When do you access them? Who do you text? Who do you do secure audio with? When you get in the car and you drive, maybe you do a phone call with somebody. So 200, what is your gait? What is your heart rate, right? Maybe you have a wearable that's connected to it. So 240 different behavioral-based characteristics that actually provide user ID, instead of user ID and password, provide access to the network. So we thought to ourselves, wow, that's really interesting. And it's interesting to me for two reasons. We have public health first responders that go into the field, and they actually need to access multiple networks to receive information, and they have username and password with each one of those networks. Well, geez, if I could give them a wireless device that used behavioral-based identity to provide that access, that would be empowering, that would streamline and allow them to focus in on their jobs. The other reason that is really interesting to me, well, there's actually three reasons. But the other reason is if you think about IoT-enabled devices in the healthcare space, in the national healthcare space, what we found is from a cyber perspective, if you're working like in an operating room, you log in to whatever equipment you're using, and you just leave yourself logged in, because you don't have the time to actually do username and password to actually log in. So what if we started to talk at the national level to the healthcare community and say, maybe here's an idea, maybe you use behavioral-based identity to actually create access to IoT-enabled devices that you're using on a network that you need access to do your job, right? And now we're no longer transmitting security information, username and password, across the infrastructure. We're storing it directly on the wireless device. And unless you can mimic my iris, the way that I walk, the way that I talk, a facial scan, my thumbprint, 240 different behavioral-based characteristics, you can't get access to the network itself, right? So those are two reasons why it was really interesting to me. The third reason that really interested me in this, and I'm not saying we're going there, because I think it would be a huge cultural change for the workforce, is I now can take my phone, which let's say it costs $700. I can buy a $7 dongle, and I can plug it into any TV and have 100% everything that's on my desktop computer or my laptop 100% available to me with a fold-out keyboard that costs $25, right? That's a lot of flexibility. I don't know if the workforce is ready for that type of cultural change. I'm going to try to switch and operate in that manner. So we're going to do a proof. It's very low cost for us. We think it can help public health first responders. It gives us the ability to engage the broader healthcare community and share some lessons learned on what we're doing. Hopefully, we know that industry will find a way to innovate with that we couldn't even imagine. And we decided to pilot it. So we haven't actually done anything with it yet. I mean, we are literally brainstorming on it right now. And we just kind of have a basic paper slide deck, thinks that this is maybe how we'll test it and how we'll use it.
Incredible. So now I'd love to open the floor for audience questions. Do we have any? Sure. I think there's a microphone coming around.
So I think we started this discussion about cloud-based computing and data storage, and we just ended with the idea of a dongle on our phone that has all of our information accessible. So based on that, is that the better approach, you think, versus cloud-based data storage? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they go hand in hand. I want to tackle the storage question because it's something that it's a very intuitive point that you bring up. So let's talk about the storage question. My answer to your question is I don't know. It's an interesting point, and I think we have to explore both. I think behavioral-based access using a wireless device where identity is stored on the wireless device and the wireless device becomes your access point to a network, right, I think is very powerful because it limits the power, and I'm not saying this about anything in particular. You can let your imaginations run wild, and I'm not going to answer any questions on it, but it limits the power of whomever the infrastructure provider is, right? So now to your point on storage, so when we actually with Accelerate, we were running into issues with storage, right? And so we started to think about it, and there's actually a really interesting case study. It's written by a woman who worked for NIH. Her name is Brenda Milner, and she studied a patient called patient HM, who's the longest standing amnesia patient in the history of the world and been studied since he was like 9 years old, and he died at like 80. So there's like a ton of study there. And what she learned is that the human brain actually stores information in 5 different places. And it may be more. I mean, I'm not a scientist, right? I just read her work. I'm standing on her shoulders. It stores information in 5 different places. So the approach that we've taken from a storage perspective is very much to mimic the brain, right? So transactional data is stored in a database directly attached to the chain. Long-term memory, bigger files is stored in an off-chain database with a corresponding hash that aligns with the chain. Anything we're going to run RPA off of or anything we're going to automate off of and we regularly use is stored in another database off-chain with a corresponding hash. Now what that allows us to do is it allows us to align different memories with one another, but also use them at different times to solve different problems on the basis of corresponding hash. So it's given us a lot of flexibility from an execution perspective. And if you think about kind of what we described with the phone and the dongle and then cloud capabilities, the first question I would ask you to think about, and I won't comment on, is why am I doing it that way, right? And I'll just leave it at that. The second point is that I may need more horsepower in a commercial cloud environment, and I may need very specific things on my device if I'm operating in like a field environment. And those two things are different. Some I need more readily accessible, some I need to do a different type of thinking. So we're hoping to align our storage strategy in that way.
Thank you so much for your talk today. To hear that blockchain is an ATO in the federal government, we're very excited here at Accenture to hear it. My question is on nodes in the network. Blockchain's exciting because you get different stakeholders all involved sharing data. With your implementation, is one corner of HHS maintaining these nodes, or have you engaged multiple sub-bureaus to help?
Yeah, right now we have 10 nodes on our implementation. We have not distributed the maintenance of those nodes because we're currently we're more focused on testing the microservices. But what we did is we piloted it with 10 nodes on a bunch of dummy data sets, and then we'll distribute ownership of those nodes out across HHS as we go to implement it. I think it's worth pointing out that what we did is we built the user interface and application level layer because we needed buy-in from the workforce. We built out 10 nodes and we tested it from a scalability perspective because we needed to understand that it could actually scale, right? And then we took that down to 1 node. So it's like we've proven that it worked. And while we're going to focus our energy on building value for our stakeholders, which are our users, and that allowed us to really keep our costs to a minimal as we piloted the UIs. And then we left identity open. We actually left identity open and flexible. Not that we didn't think about it, we thought about it, and we created this in a flexible manner so that so identity was built throughout the process, but what we were going to use from an identity perspective, and we're going to use login.gov for Accelerate, but we left open, and that gave us a ton of flexibility. But on your question specifically to nodes, we piloted it with 10 nodes. We distributed those 10 nodes across HHS to just people that were interested and tested it with a bunch of data. And then we took it down to one node because we didn't want to pay the O&M costs associated with functioning on 10 nodes if we're not actually exchanging real data. And so right now we're at a point where we hope to start to scale it in January and actually fully use the application layer, test in October and scale in January. So we will go back and start to distribute those nodes in a manner where other folks can actually maintain and use them.
Cool. And that is our time. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you guys. It was good to see you.